Okay, welcome out to the range. Hopefully the wind won't be too bad with our microphones. So laid out in front of you here are some older scopes, some newer scopes, a couple 22s, 5.56s, another 5.56, 30-06. Some examples that I have of optics. Optics go back a long ways in American history, and probably much farther in world history. One of the places that I can think of is during the Civil War. We know that there was telescopic sights put on to the muzzle-loading 50-some caliber, 58 usually caliber rifles that allowed certain personnel, military personnel, but certain ones of them, to be able to shoot 200, 300 yards. And yes, the rifles were capable of doing a lot of damage at that distance, even though they were black powder. But that telescopic sight helped them see the target at that distance versus the iron sights and trying to line up the barrels and so on. They were very rudimentary compared to what we have today. Fast forward 100 plus years. Then we get into, well, yes, we get into just standard 4-power, smaller fields of view, normal, everyday, what we would call a scope today. So here's an example of an older one. It's just a fixed 4-power, probably 32 millimeter objective on this rifle. Here's a Tasco brand. It's the same thing. It's a 3-9 by 42. I'm sorry, not 42, by 32 objective. It's just a low-end scope. It's on a backup rifle of mine. Very similar thing here is a 2 to 7 power 32 millimeter objective, Cabela's brand, built for 22 or rimfire on a nylon 66. And this is just another Tasco on a 1022. Side note, the 1022s now come with a piece of rail to put on the firearm so you can mount optics on them. You can put any kind of optic you want on them, most likely. But I have just a little rimfire 22 scope on here. Why? Because my eyes are getting to the point that trying to look at fixed and or iron sights is very difficult for me. So I like the optic. I don't have to focus on 2 different planes, etc. In that aspect, they're very, very helpful. Trying to identify targets when you turn the power up. If you can't shoot a spike and the deer you see, you're not sure if it's got a branch on it or not, you can turn the scope up, identify your target a little bit better. They help for those kind of things. Remember, safety note, don't ever use your scope to look at something unknown, i.e. you see movement, you look through your scope. That's what binoculars are for, not pointing your rifle. When you're looking through your optic, you're pointing your rifle at something. So that covers scopes. Scopes have made a huge jump since the, say, 1940s to the 2000s, okay? They got better, they got more powerful. During that time, one of the really most popular scopes, and we're not going to talk about brands, was the 3-9 power 32 millimeter objective, which is the front of the scope. So the distance across here is 32 millimeters versus 40 versus 50 is a popular brand, popular size now also. But just kind of what we call a scope nowadays instead of a telescopic sight. They were very, like I said, very, very popular. Most people put them on their deer rifles, long distance. You know, if you were out hunting elk or deer in the open areas, you had a scope on it. The scopes are very advantageous, especially for older eyes, for seeing distance, for helping to identify whether you can shoot the 3-point versus the 4-point, all those things. Some disadvantages to the old type of scopes are that they can get dust and dirt and so on the lenses. That's why you have scope covers, right? Personally, I've had a circumstance where it was snowing so flipping hard, I had snow all over it, had to clear that out and keep it cleaned out. I've had it raining on me like that. So you have those disadvantages at times. They can break. If you drop your rifle, they may get knocked off. Far more often, even with good scopes today, far more often get knocked off where you have to recheck your zero than iron sights, old-fashioned iron sights. I don't know if I've ever dropped a firearm where I knocked the iron sights off versus sometimes just in a gun safe, your scope gets knocked off somehow. Well, point of fact, Paul hates scopes because every time he would take it out of the gun safe or the gun cabinet or whatever, it would be off. Unlike the iron sights that would almost never be off for him. He had a circumstance when he was deer hunting when he was young where deer's standing there, but he can't find it in a very similar scope to this one, which is just that 4-power. Couldn't find the deer. Deer runs off, didn't get a deer that year. I don't think he ever hunted with a scope ever again. We've seen him shoot. Paul's really good with open sights. He shoots with both eyes open. He's quick. He can still see the sights and line them up. So he doesn't need the advantage of that like I do. Now he has used scopes on certain higher caliber, like I think he's got a 338 Win Mag that he uses for deer and elk. So he has used scopes once in a while, but for almost everything he's ever done for decades now, it's all been with iron sights, which is why his A1 platform has just old-fashioned iron sights. He knows how to use them. He's very, very effective with them. So that's why Paul has never done a video like this. And on that note too, it's getting really hard to find a topic that you guys are interested in that Paul hasn't covered yet. So we're trying, folks. So fast forward to what we call optics today. We're not going to go into brand names. I can tell you what these are, but I'm not going to recommend what brand is better than another brand. I will tell you that in almost everything, optics related, firearms related, the more you spend, the better the product. Not to pick on this brand name, but I think this is like a $50 scope versus a $500 scope. You're going to get better clarity. You're going to get, when you magnify it, you turn it up to that 9-power or whatever, you're going to get the focus to be the same, or where it doesn't blur out, which happens on low-end scopes. You're going to get the quality that you want out of high-end dollar scopes. So, before we go into other advantages, disadvantages, on this is my personal AR platform rifle. On it, I have a Holosun that does green because I like that color versus red. It's the HE510C-GR for green. It has a solar panel, sorry folks, has a solar panel on it. I like it. It's got a nice big reticle on it, big field of view. So when you're looking through it at whatever you think you need to look at, it allows you that field of view. Disadvantage that I have, and for a lot of red dot type modern optic users, is that if you are cross-eye dominant or you have stigmatisms and some other issues with your eyes, you can't shoot both eyes open with red dots just because of where the focus is and a lot of other things. So when I have tried in the past, whether it's with a handgun or with rifles, I see double images. They blur out. You can't find which one you want to put on the target. You don't know which one the right one is, so it's a ghost image. And it's, to be honest with you, really miserable. So I'd rather have a little less field of view and one optic or one reticle to see and be able to get that on target quickly than trying to figure out which is the right one. That's me personally. If you have those issues, think about that. Here on a different rifle I get to use frequently is an EOTech. It's an older EOTech. Disadvantage of this particular one is that it's not shake awake. And by shake awake, I mean it turns off after a few minutes, just sitting idle. But every time you pick it up, like this Holosun, every time you pick it up, the optic comes on. Which can be very, very handy if you're wanting to put your rifle or whatever firearm platform you put a red dot on into action, and the batteries don't go dead quite as fast. Here in the middle, I have a very small field of view. Vortex says right on it, strike fire. You have to push the button to turn it on. It will stay on for about, I think, 12 hours, maybe a little bit more. Has a little scope cover for the front. Had one for the back because of where it sat, it got messed up with it didn't work well on the rifle I had on. This one's a green one. It goes to red also. To change the intensity of it, you push the buttons and you can make it either brighter or less bright, depending upon your atmosphere, your outside conditions, etc., and where you want it, whether or not you're in dark buildings all the time, or you're working night shift all the time, or wherever it is. Red dots, I don't want to say most, but the dot itself has a lot of times what they call a 3 MOA, which means at 100 yards, that dot covers 3 inches or minute of angle. That's a popular setting. Whether the intensity, you can make that a little bit less when you dial it down, dial the intensity or the brightness of it inside the scope or inside the optic itself. Same thing applies on most handgun models we're going to cover here in a little bit. That being said, they are not necessarily the precision of a super fine reticle that you would find in a really high-end, more typical old-fashioned style scope. Those usually have finer lines. You can usually get less than a 3 minute of angle dot. So what I'm saying is, at 100 yards, if it will cover, that dot covers 3 inches. It's 3 inches round, theoretically, which means that the best you're going to be able to shoot most of the time is that 3 inches MOA versus all 3 holes touching in a dime size place. With the more fine scopes out there, again, the reticles, the inside wires in them that make the crosshairs, etc., are finer. You can get a more precise shot, which most of the time doesn't really matter if you're shooting an elk, a deer, a rabbit, whatever. Up close where modern rifles like these are being used, within 50, 75, 100 yards. Admit it, most of the time we're just using rifles for higher capacity and more accuracy. We're not shooting super long distance out in most of our worlds with this type of platform anymore. Unlike where you might be shooting 200, 300 yards with a deer rifle, or especially a 338 Win Mag, or some major caliber, you might be shooting 6.5 Creedmoor at an antelope at 500 yards. So red dots have their place. A lot of times they're on firearms that are very quick. I mean, you want to put them into action quick. You want to get on the target, and you're looking at what some people are calling combat accuracy hits, which means hits in the general area, not hit, 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 okay? Those are things that you need to decide where you want to be and choose from, etc. Disadvantages of the red dots, which are in general these, are that you have to maintain the batteries. You have to check them once in a while. I've seen, I don't know how many times people come to the range that with a firearm they carry almost daily and the red dot's dead. Just like when you put tack lights, other things, you need to maintain them. You can't just pull it out of the gun safe. They do get knocked off, not as easily as some of these old-fashioned, less expensive scopes, but they do at times get knocked off, so you need to check your zero on them once in a while. A lot of them, depending on the brand you buy, are pretty indestructible. You can drop them, they're not going to shatter the screens out, and so on. The field of view for, say, this Vortex is really small, okay? Even though it looks fairly big there, which makes it okay for shooting still targets and not worth a darn when I'm trying to get onto a running jackrabbit and shoot him as he goes across the desert, which is why it's not on an AR platform anymore. When I was a kid, I had a little tiny, that's how long ago it was, little tiny 1-inch 22 scope, took this jackrabbit hunting, and I took it off about 5 minutes after I was out there. Couldn't find anything, couldn't get on it, you name it, okay? So finding your target in the scope, like the story about Paul, is a big deal. That being on the right power is a big deal. So again, the higher the power, the less field of view you have. You can, hopefully, if it's a good scope, you can see the target better, but finding it is harder. If you've ever looked through binoculars, you know what I'm talking about. All right. So hopefully you've learned a little bit about red dots. Hopefully I've covered a little bit of the advantages, disadvantages. If you're putting red dots, which are a common term for modern optics, on firearms that we, like this one and the other one, that we expect to do a certain job. And yes, you can go hunting with them, you can do all those other jobs, but we expect them to do a certain job, which is why we put tack lights on them and tack slings on them, and we put red dot systems on them. Those are good. They're fast. They're going to give you those hits you need. They're going to give you those hits you need, even though it's a 3-inch dot at 100 yards, which means it covers a little bit less at certain distances or closer than 100 yards, right? A little bit more past 100 yards. Anyway, go out and find one. Maybe you got a few friends that have them. Find one that works for you. Decide whether you want red, whether you want green. Decide what you think is a good field of view for you, and really how much you want to spend. Holosun's a good, it's a good brand. This one's worked well for me. It was middle of the road, but Trijicon makes them. Leupold makes them. I think everybody out there makes them. The modern red dots are not the ones 40 years ago, if you ever saw the aim points, that had a very small field of view, and you had to turn it on, you had to turn the knob up, and you had to dink with them. So the more shake awake styles you get, the more you want to spend money for. Shake awake means it comes on when you move the firearm. The field of view, the color is field of view, the optic, whether you can adjust the optic to make, go from a circle to a single dot. Lots and lots and lots of options out there for red dots. Talk to people, do your research. With that, we're going to put these away, get out a couple handguns that have red dots on them, talk about the advantages, disadvantages of red dots and or optics as a whole on handguns. So we'll be right back. So now we have in front of us 3 different firearms, 3 different brands, 2 of the same optic in different colors, and a different brand and style of optic. All 3 firearms have a slightly different setup. They are all 9mm. So this one is a SIG M17, an X300 Ultra B, which means it's 1000 lumen light, with a Trijicon RMR in this brown color, whatever they call it, coyote. It is a red dot, 3 MOA. You can get them in 1 MOA or 5 MOA, depending on what you want. I do not yet have suppressor height sights or what you would call co-witness sights on it. It is empty, just so you know. Magazine, okay? And this way's clear downrange. I need to get a suppressor height sight and another one up front and get them on there. So if this were to go dead, then I'd be okay. I have shot also the Leupold Delta Pro or Delta Point Pro, I believe. Either way, it has a bigger field of view, but it's not quite as tough as Trijicon says these are. If you can, I'll turn around this way, try not to flag myself, but you see there's a little dip in it here, and we'll get a close-up in a minute. And that's supposed to make this housing stronger and more susceptible to getting beaten and dropped and so on and so forth that goes on a weapon you're going to use a lot, okay? I don't want to use the word combat because I'm not combat. A lot of you folks out there have been in combat, and that's a totally different world. I do carry a firearm daily, and I do put it through a lot of hell, weather, etc., but it's not combat. Anyway, that being said, these are supposed to be a tougher brand. This is the same one on a Glock pistol. This one does have co-witness sights that are just black and black, not night sights. Different place I used to work, we put them together. We had the Leupold Pro. We had night sights for your your co-witness iron sights or backups. And I liked it a little bit better because this has a smaller field of view than Leupold did. And when you put these sights in this field of view, at times they can get really busy And when you're trying to get on target very quickly, then it becomes a problem sometimes. Last, this one's my personal one. It is a Springfield Hellcat RDP. It has manual safety. It has a suppressor. I mean, it's not a suppressor. It has a compensator. Man, I'll get to it. It does also have co-witness type sights. It has a U in the back and a night sight or a Trijicon type sight up front. This one is called the SMSC. It's a Shield brand. I really like it. This one stays on all the time versus being shake awake. You can, and it's self-adjusting. So about every year I have to replace the battery in it. So you can see, hopefully, the sights are, it's a little blurry. I'm sorry about that. You can see the red dot in there. You can see how the sights line up together. And there you go. Sorry about that. It's a little shaky old man hands. Anyway, that's what it looks like when you look through this particular model. I will try to turn around so see if you can see down in there. The actual light shines onto this screen. So the light's right here, shines onto this screen. It looks like the red dot is on your target, which means there's no parallax or it's one plane. You're not having to focus on anything, which makes the red dot super handy and super quick for people with glasses and older eyes and so on. You're not trying to focus on just your sights here. So with those things, it did save my career because I was having a hard time qualifying from distance. And these, a red dot, you just put it on the target. It looks like it's out there. They are really handy for those kind of things. You look at your target, you bring the firearm up, point it at the target, and you see the dot on the target. Now I'm doing it with both eyes open. So today it's working for me under these conditions. I have a bad habit just from years and years of lining up iron sights to not do that. But the best way to use on a handgun and really most red dot type optics is to look at your target, bring the firearm up to the level, put the dot should, if you practice enough, should be on the target. So again, you look at your target, you bring it up, dot's right there, bang, 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 bring it back in, right? Safety and all that. It's very simple to use. Now, a lot of people, a couple little things, if you go out and get yourself one of these and you're struggling with it, a lot of people, they come up here and they want to look in here for the dot, not down there. And then they get doing this kind of thing with their head and they get to doing this fishing, and that's what it's called, at least in the industry. So they start fishing around for the dot and doing this, and it takes up time, it doesn't work well for them, they get frustrated. So remember, look at the target, come up, find it. If you're struggling with finding the dot, trick I was shown is you squeeze with your bottom pinky, depending on big enough grip on the firearm. Let's say this one, you squeeze with the bottom pinky, it tends to dip the barrel down a little bit or the front of the firearm down, and you'll find your dot almost every time. So if you're here and you squeeze, it brings it down, and you can find it almost every time a lot more effectively. So that's a little trick of the trade. The more you don't have to shoot to be able to do target acquisition. Make sure your firearm's empty, like this one, chamber's empty, nothing in the mag well. You can practice at home, leave the slide open. You don't have to have the slide shut or the action shut to be able to practice finding that at home. I would suggest even so far as draw from whatever holster you carry it in. This, again, is an RMR also. It's just a black colored one, the same one as this one. This has the co-witness sights as you were shown in the close-ups. Works the same way. I have had this one out here in the pouring rain, so a disadvantage to, red dots or these kind of optics are, especially if you're carrying a holster like this, water gets in here. Yes, they are designed to have drain off so that it doesn't sit there. But water gets in there, dust gets in there, snow gets in there, all kinds of crap get down onto your screen. When that happens, the light going through that refracts and you end up with a bright red blob. Not a good thing when you draw your firearm up, need it, and all you get is a bright red blob. These you can adjust the intensity. So if you're working in a dark environment, a lot of times you'd want it down. If you're working in a bright environment, you'd want it up a little bit. So that's one thing to keep in mind. This is a on all the time, self-adjusting to the light around it. So it should be a little bit brighter today. If you go into a dark area, it should automatically dim down a little bit. The disadvantage to that is that you eat batteries. And I replace one about once every year, where I'm not sure I've gone through good batteries with either one of these firearms yet. Advantages to red dots. They're quicker to get on target. Once you practice, they're quicker to get on target. You can see your target better versus shutting one eye. Especially if you're doing both eyes open, you can see the area around it. You can evaluate whether or not you need to fire or continue firing easier. They, for old person eyes, sorry, lost track of what I was wanting to say. For old person eyes, they give you that single focal point, not 3 focal points of front sight, rear sight, target. Especially from distance. I was at a point where even with glasses, I was having a hell of a time qualifying from distance because I was not gripping the gun right. I wasn't lining up the sights right because they were all blurry, and I was worried more about that than I was trigger control and other things. Where I was working at the time, went to red dots. They were the Leupold red dots. Gives you a bigger screen, just as tough, different, just works the same way. It's just a little bit bigger screen. And basically those saved my career because then I didn't have to worry about those three focal planes, and I was able to just put the dot on target, concentrate on my grip, my trigger squeeze, and qualify from distance. They're a little bit quicker. When you're talking handgun sizes, handgun distances, you don't really need to worry too much about how big that red dot is. So these three, the dot inside is what they call a 3 MOA dot, meaning at 100 yards, it'll take up 3 inches. Closer, obviously smaller. Farther away, obviously bigger. But that's what they call it. So when you look through there, you're going to have that dot. It's not super precise, meaning it's really hard to shoot, 10 rounds through a hole that big because you can't put the dot necessarily at the same exact spot every time like you can a fixed front sight or other systems. But keep in mind that we're going for combat effective hits. And I'm sorry to use that term, but that's what the industry is using right now. But basically, hits, okay? Not hits. And even if you're shooting for a different specific area of the target, that should be a 3-inch dot or 3-inch circle, especially at closer distances, should be small enough to get the job done. These two in the Trijicon brand come in a 1 MOA dot, and they also come in a 5 MOA dot. That 5 dot, again, would be 5 inches at 100 yards, the 1 being 1 inch at 100 yards. I spent a long time talking to a Trijicon rep who talked to a lot of people in the industry I'm in currently, not military personnel or others. And what they were finding is they wanted that 1 for more precise shots, but they really didn't need it. And under stressful conditions and or trying to shoot quick, it wasn't big enough to really find quickly. So that 1 MOA dot is really fine, and you have to turn it up to get it bright enough to find quickly on a target. Red tends to blend in with things. For people that are around other weapon systems, i.e. tasers or something like that, you get a lot of red dots dancing around, and it's hard to tell which one is yours at times. At least that's what I have found in training. So, advantages, great for older eyes, great for quick shooting, very, very tough systems. We have dropped some, and they don't get knocked off on the handguns. Disadvantages, batteries you have to check and maintain. Weather susceptible, never had iron sights or fixed sights ever have a problem with rain or snow or anything else. Just saying. But there again, I'm having problems with, focusing with my trifocals at the right distance with them. These are just two different brands. There are lots of different brands. With everything, you get what you pay for. Not trying to brag or anything else. The gun is the price it was. I want to say this was another almost $500, and this was another almost $3.50, just to put these two things. And that doesn't include upgrading the sights so you can see you have backup sights. They are spendy. You can get them on sale once in a while. There are what they're calling closed emitter ones coming out now, which is, it's all encompassed. It's supposed to be more less weather susceptible. That way the weather doesn't get in there. It doesn't, refract wrong, etc. A lot of people like them. What I don't like about this brand is that this screen gets really tight, meaning really small when you're trying to put sights in there with it. The Leupold one, which are just as hard to get a hold of because they're super popular, is a bigger screen, little tiny bit less tough. Trijicon basically says you can run over this with a tank and you aren't going to damage it because of the way it's shaped and everything. So if you're looking for one that you're going to carry every day, beat up, throw in the back wherever you're putting your gear, etc., you probably want to go with a Trijicon. You're always going to get your money's worth. The more money you spend, most of the time, especially on optics, the better product you're going to get. I wouldn't want to spend $200 on an optic that the first time either I dropped the gun, put my holster somewhere, whatever happened to it, it's off, or meaning it's knocked off, or it's broken, or etc. So most of them out there are pretty strong, I guess is what I was going to say. They're pretty good at not being susceptible to damage. There's some other tricks that we probably don't need to go into today, but in general, that is a overview of optics, what we're calling optics today. When you say optic, most of the time people are talking about red dots, not the old-fashioned 3-to-9 scope. A lot of people get carried away. I shouldn't say carried away. A lot of people want to have iron sight backups, a nice optic, and then a smaller red dot similar to this one maybe on the side of their AR. So, you can go a lot of ways with things. One that I don't have an example of, I forgot to cover for you, is what they're calling the low power variable optic. Usually it's a 1:4 that goes on a rifle behind a red dot, like I was showing you earlier, the Holosuns, etc. And it gives you that magnification, 1:4 in those cases. Again, the 4 power is going to give you less of a field of view. Short little story. Friend of mine, different agency, doing a night shoot. Everybody's target's online. It's winter, so the smoke's not clearing, so he had a little bit of issues there. But he had his low power variable optic cranked up to 4 so he could see the target, and he couldn't find his target. So he would shoot, a little bit of recoil, something would move, he'd be on the neighbor's target. He'd shoot. So he really struggled with, well, on a range, struggling and learning that lesson's one thing. Having to put it into practice and use that rifle for other purposes is a different story. And he didn't ever think, and nobody had ever taught him, unfortunately, that the higher the power, the smaller your field of view, and the more issues you're going to have finding your target at distance. Keep those things in mind, right? For most people, you can flip them out of the way. You can go back just to your standard red dot. Of course, almost no red dots have magnification in them. So now you're trying to identify a target at 100 yards. As far as sportsmen are concerned, make sure you check your local laws and hunting regulations, etc., before you just put one of these on your 450 Marlin handgun or whatever else you're going to go hunt with. Make sure that that's okay. They do make scopes, old-fashioned type scopes for handguns. And I did talk to the Trijicon people and then asked them, because I was wanting to put one of these on that 450 Marlin I have. And they said, yep, it'll take the recoil. They are designed to get beaten back and forth on semi-autos. You name the caliber, it's okay. So he guaranteed me, not in writing, that it would take the recoil of big, heavy revolver cartridges. I have yet to test that out. All that hopefully you've learned something today. Hopefully you've got a little bit of more information. You can go out, do a little bit more research, choose what you want, and hopefully you can find some friends that have some red dots you can go practice with. Some guys I work with hate the things. I love them. They are a very useful tool, but like all tools, like all electronics, they are susceptible to certain things. So get out, practice, train with, know your equipment, know what may be wrong with it, how to fix it, all those things. So you're always the best prepared for the worst case situations.